and welcome to Wild Old Times, a podcast about the strange and curious sides of Ireland and Irish history. My name is Ciaran Conliffe, and on this episode I'll be talking to you about Irish mummies. Now, I'm not talking about Irish mammies. There are more than enough podcasts about those. No, I'm talking about mummies, the preserved corpse kind. The name actually comes from the medieval Arabic word mumia, which is based on their word for bitumen. They mistakenly thought it had been used to preserve Egyptian mummies, and the name stuck. We've already talked about one Irish mummy on this podcast, an anonymous middle-aged man who died around 500 BC and whose body was repatriated from Cork to Egypt in 2024. But he wasn't the only mummy on the island of Ireland. There are more than a few others, and I'm going to tell you all about them. The mummy we talked about before was found in University College Cork, where it had been kept mostly out of sight and largely forgotten about for a century. What if I told you that UCC wasn't the only Irish university that turned out to have a mummy hidden on the premises? Trinity College Dublin had a mysterious mummy of their own, and they called him Maurice. Maurice the Mummy was an urban legend on the TCD campus until 2011. That's when the medical school celebrated their tricentenary, and they opened a shiny new building on Pierce Street. The department moved into the new building and out of their home since 1825, the old anatomy department at the east end of the college. It was to be turned into a new private anatomy museum for the students. So they began sorting through the huge collection the department had amassed over the centuries. A large part of the collection was under the floor of the lecture theatre, and it was there they found Maurice. Coincidentally, this was the same place UCC hid their mummy for a few decades while they figured out what to do with it. The mummy at TCD, still in its case, had a note on it saying it had been put in storage in 1948 because it was unsuitable for display. This was clearly true because, for starters, it was missing its head. The team looking into it immediately began searching the collection for the missing piece. Disturbingly, they found several mummy heads, but none of them matched Maurice. They also started digging into the archives. It is quite a task for an institution as old as Trinity. Trinity College Dublin is indisputably the oldest surviving university in Ireland. It was established in 1592 under the rule of Queen Elizabeth I as a replacement for the old University of Dublin, a Catholic institution that had fallen victim to the Reformation. In the centuries that followed, it became a symbol of Protestant rule over Ireland. Its first provost was an Anglican archbishop, and while Catholics were technically allowed to attend, they had to swear oaths that most of them had a problem with, and they were also blocked from becoming professors and receiving scholarships. The same rules also applied to Presbyterians and other non-Anglican Protestants. Even when some of those restrictions were removed in the 19th century, Catholic bishops in Ireland decided to place their own ban on Catholics attending, and this remained in force until 1970. The researchers found what they were looking for in an entry dated November 1888, which said the mummy had come from Dr. George Stokes, the keeper of Marsh's Library. The library was built in 1705 and was named after Narcissus Marsh, who was Archbishop of Dublin at the time. Marsh's was the first public library in Ireland and was populated generally by men of learning donating their collections to it in their wills. This meant that it had a lot of random storage rooms full of uncatalogued treasures, and it was in one of these that Dr. Stokes found the mummy. Deciding that it probably shouldn't be kept in a library, he then gave it to the university. It was added to the anatomical collection, given a cursory examination, and then forgotten about. Exactly how the mummy wound up in Marsh's library is a mystery. There are two likely candidates for bringing it there. The less likely of the two is Richard Pocock. He was an Englishman, descended on both sides of his family from generations of Anglican clerics. He's best known for his travels in the 1730s, as he wrote detailed accounts in letters to his mother, which have been preserved and published. In 1733, at the age of 29, he and a cousin took the traditional grand tour of Europe. In 1737, they travelled out again. While the cousin returned home from Italy, Pocock continued on to the Middle East. One of the countries he visited in this tour was Egypt. He returned home in 1741 and in 1745 he was appointed Archdeacon of Dublin. While in this post he travelled around Ireland, and he continued to travel for the rest of his life. Pocock is possible, but, as I said, unlikely. While he did bring at least one mummy back from Egypt, it was taken to London and dissected by the London Egyptian Society. The descriptions of this mummy also do not match the one found at Trinity. So unless he brought two mummies back, it wasn't him. The more likely candidate is Robert Huntington. Like Pocock, he was an English clergyman, though from the 17th and not 18th century. He was the chaplain for the Levant Company, a chartered company who managed British trade with the Middle East, including importing a great many mummies. Huntington was based out of Aleppo, but he travelled all throughout the region and bought many rare manuscripts on behalf of people back home. One of those people was Narcissus Marsh. When Huntington resigned from his post as chaplain in 1681, he became provost of Trinity College, Dublin, on Marsh's recommendation. He resigned that post in 1692, but returned to Ireland in 1701, the year Marsh's library was opened. This was to take the post of Bishop of Raphoe in County Donegal, but he died after only 2 months on the job. If it was Huntington that brought the mummy to the museum, then researchers think they may have a name for him, Ankh Hap. We also know for a fact that he died around 3,500 years ago, but we don't know much else. We know a lot less about him than we do about the two mummies on display in museums in Ireland, Tent Dinaboo and Takabuti. Tent Dinaboo resides in the National Museum of Ireland. As you would expect from someone so prominently displayed, she's a much more magnificent specimen than the two found in university basements. In fact, her mummy and coffin are said to have been a perfect illustration of the Egyptian funerary arts at their peak, around 800 BC, during the 22nd dynasty. Tent Dinaboo was buried at Thebes, which the ancient Egyptians called Waset. It was sometimes the capital of ancient Egypt, but it wasn't during her lifetime. It was still one of the most important cities in Egypt, and Tent Dinaboo was someone important in the city. Thebes was the holy city of Amun-Ra, who was once the preeminent god of all Egypt. Tent Dinaboo's coffin tells us that she was a sistrum player for Amun-Ra. Sistrum is a type of rattle, used in ceremonial music. The sound of the sistrum was regarded as an important way to call on the deities. It's possible the repetitive clacking acted as a form of hypnosis. Because the sistrum was the instrument of Hathor, the sky goddess, sistrum players were always women. The opulence of Tent Dinaboo's burial tells us that either her role as sistrum player was a really important one, or that she was the wife of someone really important. Tent Dinaboo lived through an unusual period in ancient Egyptian history. Though the important thing to remember about Egyptian history is that it's measured in millennia, not centuries. Cleopatra, for example, lived closer to our time than she did to the building of the Great Pyramid. Tent Dinaboo lived during the Third Intermediate Period, when Egypt was ruled by foreign kings. But this would have begun over a century before her birth, and would go on for centuries after she died. The rulers of the 22nd dynasty were Libyans, but they thoroughly assimilated into the Egyptian culture and ruled as pharaohs. Their control over the whole of Egypt was shaky, though, and the powerful priesthood in Thebes effectively ruled the city independently. As an important member of the temple, Tent Dinaboo would have been a noble lady of Thebes. She probably had a good life, and she definitely had a long one. X-rays show she was quite old when she died, and she seems to have died of natural causes. The same is sadly not true of Takabuti, the mummy in the Ulster Museum in Belfast. She also lived in Thebes, around 150 years after Tent Dinaboo. She was less than 30 years old when she died, and she was murdered. For a long time it was thought that she was killed with a knife, but in 2021, Professors Aileen Murphy and Rosalie David revealed after extensive research that she was killed with an axe that struck her from behind, killing her instantly. The fact that a weapon was used implied that she was killed by a soldier, possibly an Assyrian soldier. In 663 BC, around the time she died, the Assyrian army attacked and sacked Thebes. Takabuti may have been a casualty of that attack. Although she died brutally, Takabuti was treated with dignity after her death. One unusual thing about her was that she kept her own hair. The fashion of the time was that people would shave their heads and then wear black wigs. But she wore her own red hair. Even after death, she was left with her hair, and it was carefully washed and styled. She was also buried in a tomb that fitted her status. From the hieroglyphs on her coffin, we know that her father was a priest of Amun-Ra, which, like Tentdinabu, would have made her a noble of Thebes. There is no mention of a husband on the coffin, but we know she was married because her title is given as house mistress. Either way, the care she was treated with speaks to the tragedy of her death and how much she was missed by those she left behind. Takabuti came to Belfast in 1834. She was bought in Egypt, along with her coffin, by Thomas Gregg while he was on his grand tour. He donated her to the Belfast Natural History Society, a private society who had their own museum in Belfast city centre. Takabuti was unveiled in a public unwrapping party. This was a popular, if grim, entertainment of the time. Her bandages were a particular source of fascination to the locals. The linen industry was at the heart of Belfast at the time, and these examples of the craft from over 25 centuries earlier inspired a lot of people. Prior to the unwrapping, a local artist named John Campbell painted the mummy. His drawing was extremely useful to later scholars, as it showed the wrapping before it was disturbed by the unrollers. Takabuti's unwrapping was a scientific affair, or as close as one could get at the time. They measured her height and commented on her hair. A phrenologist made a study and declared that her skull showed a high degree of intellectual capacity but little or no taste. One of the people in attendance was Francis Davis, a poet. He had been born working class as the son of a soldier, but gained enough renown with his poems to eventually become editor of the Belfastman's Journal magazine. At this point he was still unrecognised and attended as a member of the public. He wrote several poems inspired by the experience throughout his career. By 1910, the expense of running a private museum was too much for the society. They donated the bulk of their collection to the city of Belfast. Takabuti initially went on display in the Old Museum and Library, which is nowadays just the city library. In 1929, when the Ulster Museum opened, she became the centrepiece of their ancient Egyptian section. There she has remained to this day, inspiring a fascination in ancient Egypt within generations of children who visited. One of those was Ian Dugan, who went on to become a TV producer. In 2006, he pitched a documentary about Takabuti to the BBC, who accepted it. It was broadcast in 2009, under the extremely 2000s name of Show Me the Mummy. The name came from the centrepiece of the documentary, a reconstruction of Takabuti's face using the best technology of the time. A statue based on this reconstruction still sits in the exhibit today, though that reconstruction is now obsolete. In 2018, Professors Aileen Murphy and Rosalie David led a team who did a full study on Takabuti, and as part of that, the same team who did the earlier reconstruction applied more modern techniques to give us an even better and more realistic version. Part of these improvements was incorporating Takabuti's distinctive hair into the image. They also were the ones to discover the true cause of her death and found several anomalies in how she was mummified. This might have been because of her injuries preventing the usual techniques being applied, or it might have been a desire to make her look more presentable. One of the changes was that her brain was removed by cutting into her skull, instead of taking it out through the nose. Her heart was wrapped in linen before being placed back in her chest, and the wounds in her shoulder were disguised. But one of the most interesting discoveries by the 2018 investigation was the possible explanation for Takabuti's unusual hair colour, and her pride in it. They did a genetic analysis and found a haplogroup in Takabuti's mitochondrial DNA inherited from her mother that came from far to the north of Egypt, specifically from the Germanic tribes of Europe. Whether it was from her mother, or her mother's mother, or even further back than that, Takabuti's heritage is a reminder that the ancient world was a far more cosmopolitan place than we might think, and even in those days, connections crossed continents. But there are other mummies in Ireland that are not Egyptian, stranger creations of chance and nature rather than human artifice. For example, under St Michans Church in Smithfield there is a vault with a limestone in the walls causes all bodies there to become mummified, creating Ireland's largest collection of preserved corpses. St Michans is a church with a long history. The first church was built on the site by the Vikings of the Kingdom of Dublin, back in 1095. The kingdom ended in 1171 when it was conquered by the Normans. The church persisted. The building there now was built by Sir William Robinson in 1686. He was the Surveyor General of Ireland, appointed by the British government to carry out public works like this. Given who it was that rebuilt it, it's not surprising that it became an Anglican church. In 1742, George Frederick Handel visited the church. He used its organ, the same one there today, to practice before the most important concert of his career, the premiere of his defining work, Messiah. The vaults date back to before the remodelling of the church. In fact, some of the bodies there are over 800 years old. But it was after the renovation that it became famous. By the 19th century, they had become a tourist attraction, written about in magazines like the Dublin Penny Journal. It was also still an active cemetery up until then. Many of the United Irishmen who were executed after the failed 1798 rebellion are buried there. Two of the most notable are Henry and John Shearers, brothers who were executed at Newgate for their role in the uprising. The four most famous mummies in the crypts, though, have no name attached to them. They were displayed with their coffins open and their mummified remains on display. They were the Crusader, the Nun, the Thief, and the Unknown. The Crusader was the most famous. We don't know if he actually was a Crusader, but he did die 800 years ago, in the right time period. He was a giant of a man for the time, 6'5", tall even today. The Nun came from slightly more recent times, the 15th or 16th century. The Thief gets his name from parts of his body being missing, a hand and both feet, allegedly a punishment for stealing. And as for the Unknown, well, naturally we don't know much about her. Sadly though, if you want to go to the crypts today, you're out of luck. This is due to an unfortunate series of incidents of vandalism. During the 2010s, the dark tourism boom had made the crypts a popular destination, and they received 28,000 visitors a year. That came to an end in 2019, when a man named Brian Bridgman, intoxicated on a mixture of alcohol and tranquilizer pills, broke into the vault one night and smashed the crypts up. He damaged the nun's body and tore the head from the Crusader before fleeing with that head and another skull in a bag. When he sobered up, he was horrified to see what he had taken, and anonymously returned the two heads with a note of apology. But he was identified from CCTV footage, arrested, and sentenced to 28 months in jail. The crypts were closed for a time, but reopened later in the year. It was an incident in 2024 that put an end to the tours permanently, or at least for the foreseeable future. A man named Christian Topeter, who had a previous conviction for arson, broke into the crypt and started a fire. As with Brian Bridgman, he was intoxicated on a mixture of alcohol and drugs. The fire destroyed several of the mummies, including the Crusader, and the water needed to put out the fire damaged several more. Luckily, it was noticed and dealt with before the church itself was damaged. Topeter, like Bridgman, was identified from CCTV footage, arrested and charged. The church was closed for some time afterwards. While it has reopened, the crypts remain sealed, and the bodies are likely to be moved elsewhere, to a private location. The last variety of Irish mummy we'll cover today are the infamous bog bodies. These are not specifically an Irish phenomenon. They've been found all over Europe, and some have even been found in North America. Like the mummies of St Michans, they are the creations of chance rather than artifice. If a peat bog in a colder country is close enough to the sea, then the bog can become acidic. Then if a body is buried in the bog during a colder time of year, the acid can saturate the body before it begins to rot, resulting in it being preserved. Effectively, the body is pickled. Part of what makes bog bodies so eerie is that their hair and even their clothes can be preserved as well. Tattoos can even be seen on their skin, giving us a unique glimpse into that aspect of their lives. The oldest bog body in Ireland is a 4,000-year-old corpse found in 2011 near Cashel in County Laois, where it was uncovered by a peat harvesting machine. As is traditional, he's known by a name based on where he was found, Cashel Man. He might be the oldest bog body in the world, depending on your definition. Much older human remains have been found in bogs, notably an 8,000-year-old set of bones in Kjellberg in Denmark. But that's all they were, bones. Cashel Man is the oldest, with his flesh still intact after thousands of years. Because of the way he was buried, archaeologists think that he was a human sacrifice. It was previously known that young men were sacrificed by the ancient Celts around 500 BC, but Cashel Man suggests it had been going on for much longer than anyone had thought. In later times, this was often a king sacrifice. When the kingdom suffered extremely poor luck, bad harvests, disease, or other natural disasters, it was taken as a sign that the gods were displeased with the ruler. So a new king would be chosen, and the old one would be killed as part of his inauguration. If Cashel Man was a sacrifice, probably wasn't by choice. One of his arms was broken before his death. Unfortunately, the damage caused when the peat harvester uncovered him makes finding his cause of death impossible. One other reason to think he might be a sacrifice king is that he was found near the hill where kings of Offaly would be crowned in centuries to come. If this is true, it means that the traditions of Irish kingship, which were thought to have lasted about 2,000 years before coming to an end in the 15th century, actually lasted over 3,500 years. Several other bog bodies fit the pattern of young men being sacrificed. One of the most notable was found in Gala in the county of Galway. He is the earliest discovered bog body that we still have. He was uncovered in 1821 and was claimed by the O'Kelly family who owned the land. Several others had been found in the 18th century, but all have been reburied and lost. Gala Man was also reburied, but the O'Kellys were not above uncovering him again when people offered to pay to see him. Eventually, in 1829, he was sold to the Royal Irish Academy, and he is now in the National Museum of Ireland. The treatment of the site by the O'Kellys was not the best from an archaeological point of view, but it does still give us a record of how Gala Man was placed in the bog. He was buried 10 feet deep, and 2 wooden stakes held him down. This might have been for symbolic reasons, or just to stop him rising to the surface of the soft peat. He was strangled with a willow rod, and he was dressed only in a long deerskin cape. He might have been wearing linen clothes that decayed away over the centuries. The cape was badly damaged by the repeated excavations, but what remains shows it was very well made. Staff was laid next to him as well. Despite the damage to his cape, Gala Man himself was not badly damaged, and he does look very like a mummy. Like Takabuti, his hair was preserved, and like her, it was a dark shade of red. He was about 6 feet tall and in his mid-20s when he died. Overall, he fits right into the pattern of king's sacrifice. There are a lot of other Irish bog bodies, though, and not all fit that pattern. Several were found buried in proper graves rather than sacrificed. Several children have been found, including a boy found in Malahi in 2023. Female bog bodies are rare. Several have also been found. Most notable was Mina Brady woman, who was found near Ardra in 1978. She was the only fully fleshed bog body found in Ireland in the 20th century, though several have already been found in the 21st. Mina Brady woman was probably in her late 20s and doesn't seem to have died violently. She was buried in a shallow grave, only 3 feet deep, and wrapped in a woolen cloak. The cloak is a bit of a mystery. Carbon dating puts her as having died sometime between the 11th and 14th centuries, but the style of the cloak is from the 16th and 17th. Either the dating for her was wrong due to contamination, or she was dug up and reburied in the cloak. Either way, there's definitely some mystery behind her death and burial that we will probably never know. So the next time you're walking through a peat bog in Ireland, or through the halls of a respected university, or down the aisle of a beautiful old church, spare a thought for what might be beneath your feet, because Ireland doubtless still has more hidden mummies to be revealed. This has been Wild Old Times, a podcast about the stranger corners of Ireland and Irish history. The opening theme is The Cat That Ate the Candle. The closing theme is The Parting Glass. Both were recorded by Gregory Mahan and are used under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of Greg's music at tinwhistler.com. Our logo is by Liffy Designs. Wild Old Times is recorded at Farset Labs in Belfast. If you enjoyed the podcast, give it a review wherever you find it. It really does help the show. If you really enjoyed it, tell your friends. Either way, I hope to see you again for another wild old time from Irish history.